Hello everybody, and welcome to today's review of Richard Jewell. It is the new film directed by Clint Eastwood, starring Paul Walter Hauser, Kathy Bates, Sam Rockwell, Olivia Wilde, and Jon Hamm. So this film is based on the true story of the bombing that occurred in the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia. During the bombing, a security guard named Richard Jewell discovers the bomb and does what he can to evacuate the area. In the end, over 100 people got injured and 2 people died. But a lot of people agree if Richard Jewell did not discover the bomb in time, there would have been a lot more casualties. And so as a result, Richard is lauded as a hero. But then the FBI starts to suspect that Richard Jewell himself was actually the one who planted the bomb. And soon the media got a hold of that story and then just blew it out of proportion. Both the FBI and the news outlets start to investigate Richard's life, and any little thing that they don't like or that they find very suspicious or odd, they use that against him to try to build him up as the guilty one. And it's so rough. This movie is very hard to watch because it shows how a corrupt law enforcement and how the media can destroy an innocent life. This was clearly a passion project for Clint Eastwood. He is one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. He has directed some of my favorite films in the past, and I love his style. I love the stories that he chooses. I'll admit that he hasn't done a great job lately. I personally like The Mule, but I know it wasn't great. The 1517 to Paris, I couldn't watch that. I couldn't watch it. But with this one, his approach was very different. This didn't feel rushed in any way. From the pacing and how intimate Eastwood became with his characters, you can tell that this was a story that he really wanted to tell. I saw this film with my father. After we left the theater, he asked me 2 questions. 1, do you think that this movie is anti-law enforcement? The second was, is this film relevant? To answer both questions, no, I don't think this movie is anti-law enforcement. And yes, this movie is relevant. This movie comes down to simple human decency and the repercussions of what happens when we abandon it, all for the sake of a false sense of security and publicity. The character of Richard Jewell has a tremendous respect for law enforcement. He himself is studying and training to become an officer. However, things did not go the way he wanted to, and he became a security guard. But he still has a lot of respect for police officers, for the FBI, for the CIA, for the military. I mean, he's a typical Boy Scout when it comes to regulations. Obviously, his viewpoints are then tainted because of what he experienced. I mean, his name is being dragged through the mud, and the authorities do everything they can to make him look guilty. And he is humiliated on a national level. And as to the relevance of the film, I mean, ever since 9/11 happened, we live in a very fearful time, and we're extremely divided. Law enforcement makes a ton of mistakes because the people working in this job, they're angry, they're scared. The media gets things wrong all the time because they want to sell stories and they also want to stay relevant. Most of the time, when people want to learn about the news, they read it off of this. But all that power and influence that these institutions have on people, it can become very dangerous. And these are very dangerous times, and stories like this should be told. Clint Eastwood directed this film in a way that didn't feel like an attack. I also give credit to the writer Billy Ray, who wrote these characters and these situations in a way that's very relatable. You understand the reasons why these people do what they do. No one's just a hard-blown villain just because, for the sake of having an antagonist. No, there is a reason behind their actions. A legit reason, albeit unfair, but it's reasonable. The bombing happened during the Olympics. So Jon Hamm, who's a composite character of a bunch of agents who investigated Richard Jewell, he is upset because, this happened under his watch. So he feels responsible and guilty for all those who lost their lives or all those who were injured during the bombing. And so he is very determined to find whoever the culprit was. And the reason they go after Richard Jewell is because his background, his life story, his whole situation, he pretty much fit the profile of the lone bomber, which matches the profile of all the bombers that they've caught in the past. So it's understandable why they go after him. However, how they go after him, that is problematic. They really tried to manipulate him. They tried to get him to say things or try to incriminate himself. And as for the media, I mean, you understand that in times when people don't really care about the news, they're not reading a lot of stories, or a lot of people are not becoming interested anymore, you would understand that when a terrorist attack occurs, the news outlets will just quickly jump on this story because lots of people will be interested in reading this stuff, so they go after the juicy stories. And one reporter, played by Olivia Wilde, she wants to go even further. She's the one who gets the story out there that Richard Jewell was the prime suspect. Albeit the FBI really didn't want this story to be public. But, the journalist, even though she did a questionable thing, she really didn't do anything bad. She reported the facts, and the movie addresses this. The only unfortunate thing that happened is that other outlets got a hold of the story and blew it out of proportions. And it really ruined this man's life because he had no privacy. Everybody was always hounding him, questioning whether or not he was a terrorist. I mean, this guy had it rough. This movie is a very intricate story, very complex. When you watch it, it's all understandable and yet unfortunate. It makes you so angry. And the acting, there is not a bad performance in this movie at all. Paul Walter Hauser. I only knew this guy from a certain amount of films like I, Tonya or Late Night. In a lot of those cases, he was playing morons. So it was nice to see a nice change of pace from this guy. He delivers a performance that is so layered and so, deep and powerful because you, like I said, you really feel for this guy. He understands, what he's going through, while at the same time he's angry because he doesn't know how else to defend himself other than being himself. But it's being himself that's causing all this chaos. And the movie does a great job portraying him as a hero, but not so much as a saint. This guy, even though he is kind-hearted and innocent, and he performed a heroic deed, he is very naive. During the investigation, Richard Jewell says and does a lot of things that are, sort of ill-advised. As you're watching him, you're thinking, oh man, you shouldn't have said that. Dude, shut up! And Richard's mother, Barbara Jewell, played by Kathy Bates, I mean, she is the greatest support that Richard has. She is like his anchor that tries to bring him back down to reality whenever he's making a fool of himself. Kathy Bates, I also want to say, has a moment in this film where tensions are high and Richard actually yells at her, which causes her to have this emotional breakdown. It was a very honest moment, I felt, about a mother who is just trying to protect her son, and yet she feels powerless. This was a powerful performance by Kathy Bates, one of the best that I've seen her in a long time. I experienced a lot of emotions. Obviously I was angry for Richard because it was unfair what was happening to him. But it also reminded me of an incident that happened to me while I was an RA in college. Our campus was strictly no alcohol on the premises. And one night I caught somebody in a dorm with alcohol. I was going to write him up for it, and the guy tried to persuade me not to. He even went so far as to tell me that if I did this, I was going to make enemies, that I was not going to have a lot of respect, that people will only continue to break the rules, and he also said, this is how you're not going to make a lot of friends. It always baffled me how a lot of people could look down on you simply because you're the type of person who follows the rules to a T. So yeah, I related to Richard Jewell a lot. So as for a few negatives of the film, this film did do a good job at introducing the characters, but it did kind of drag on. There were some scenes or shots that could have been cut shorter or cut out entirely. The pacing does get better. After the bombing happens, you are really invested. And things progress pretty smoothly throughout. But by the time you get to the third act, it also starts to drag again. And that was also a moment where Richard Jewell decided, you know what? I'm going to stand up for myself and fight back. But to me, it really didn't feel like a fight. More like, this is what happened. The FBI didn't have anything, so this happened. Other than that, I thought this film was great. Very important, very relevant, lots of great performances, and I related to the main character a lot. So, I'm gonna give this movie an A. Good job, Clint Eastwood, and thank you so much for watching my video, ladies and gentlemen. I hope to see you again soon.